Hi, and welcome to Rob's Boat Stuff. Anyway, what we're going to be doing is replacing them rails and putting these beautiful ones on, or trim, whatever you want to call it. So, first thing I had to do was make a jig for the palm sander here to smooth out this edge. It was really rough, and putting in a new trim right here on the sides would not line up properly and leave little gaps in between the new top, and I didn't want that. So I built this jig to mount right to the side and then get a perfectly smooth cut. Next, I needed to mark my trim that I'm putting in here because it's not the right size, obviously. So we mark it with a pencil, just slide it in and just trim around the edges. And then we're going to take it out to the cut-off saw or miter saw and trim them up and make them fit perfectly. Now for all the trim here, using a really good miter saw right here, and they work great. You want something good to use. The next thing I'm going to do is get these trim pieces on. I'm using 610. I love 610, as I've said it in my other videos. It works great. It stays in the place that it's supposed to stay in, and you really can't get better. This is the only piece that I'm just using 610 on and not mounting with screws. Now I pre-cut some bendable pieces of wood. Wooden dowels work perfect. But I had these other pieces and they were extra laying around and they bend really nicely. So what I'm using is putting them in there to keep pressure on both sides to hold these two pieces of trim in place. Once I've got this maneuvered, once you get them in, you can adjust it and get it perfect, and then use some acetone to clean your edges and clean all the 610 off and make sure it's all the way off of the countertop. Next, I'm going to start trimming all my pieces up. So once I get all the trim, and then I measure everything out that I need and then start trimming. Now right here you can see that they don't line up perfectly, and we're going to have to fix that later. Now in measuring these, I'll put the pieces on, mark where I need to cut it, go out and cut it, doing one piece at a time. On your corners, move them around and make sure that they're in the spot that you want them in, then mark it, because some corners will fit differently on different edges of your countertop. So maneuver them around, change them up, and see which ones fit on which corners better. Not all of them are the same degrees. They're supposed to be, but they are not. So keep that in mind. And now I also mark all of my pieces so that I know which corners go where and which ones fit in the better places. And the same with the wood. So I don't have to look around and guess which pieces are the right lengths. Once I've got them all fit and cut, I tape them all on just to make sure that they're all fitting perfectly. And you're going to tape them on again a little bit. So once you get all of them taped on and fit perfectly, pull them all off. And now we're going to start from the inside of the piece, and we're going to start marking where we want our pilot holes for our Forstner bit. So I marked the pilot holes, and then I'm using a punch to punch a starter hole in there. And then this is all going to be for the bung holes, actually. Bung holes. It's kind of funny if you think back in the 80s. But anyway, I'm old. So anyway, I'm punching the holes, and this is a pilot hole I've already got started. Now when you start to drill your pilot holes, you want to use a very small bit. This is just a pilot hole for the Forstner bit. Now I'm coming through from the back side of all my pieces, so I want to put a piece of wood underneath them so that it doesn't splinter on the outside. So now once I've got all these pilot holes drilled, and I'm going to use my Forstner bit. Now the depth that you want to go is going to be depending on the thickness of the wood. Now for my bit here, it was almost perfect for the thickness of the Forstner bit, but I actually go a little bit shallower. Now next thing I'm going to do is use a drill bit that is just very slightly larger than my screw, and then I'm going to run it down the pilot holes and then open them up, because I want my screws to be slightly loose inside of the trim itself. Next, I'm going to clean everything really well because I'm about to start the actual application. So I'm going to clean especially where they're going to be mounted. You don't want any dust or anything like that on there. Now after we've got the pieces cleaned, I'm going to start putting my pieces back on. Now the first thing I'm going to do is put them on and just put the screws, or drill my pilot holes for my screws. So once I've got them lined up where I need them, I use a drill bit that's about 2 sizes smaller than the screw that you're going to be using to install these, and just drill my pilot holes in here. And you'll get to a point while you're putting these on that they're not going to line up with each other properly. So at that point is where you're going to stop and then start your actual application from the beginning, where you started. And then we're going to be gluing them pieces on rather than screwing at that point. So right here is the point as far as I can go with the application, screwing, actually drilling my pilot holes and screwing them on before I have to start gluing the pieces. Now you'll notice that some of your corners may not line up perfectly, so you'll want to get them edges good by sanding them. Now just a quick tip, a lot of these corners like these are really, really short, so I can't do an angle trim on it. Normally I'd cut the edges of these at an angle and then have a nice like 45-degree angle on them to join them with, but these corners were so short it just made it impossible to do that. So I'm using straight edges on all of the joints. Now again, 610 to mount this. That piece is the only one that's probably going to be screwed completely on and tight, and then all the other pieces I'll leave the screws slightly loose and then adjust them the way I need as I'm gluing them on and screwing them on, and forcing the 610 into any cracks or anything like that that you need. One important thing is to clean up the 610 as you go using the acetone, and just clean your edges so that you don't have any left, because it's harder to sand the 610 than it is the teak, and if you try to sand the 610 off when you have a lot left, you'll end up sanding more teak than what you need. Alright, so at this point is where I have to start keeping my screws loose and then pushing the pieces on where I need and then taping them to hold them in the location that they need to be. So you'll kind of have something that looks like this with all your pieces kind of taped on to hold them in the spot that they need to be. Now I'm going to put in the bungs, and you want to make sure that the grain in your bungs is lined up with the grain in your trim. And then glue your bungs in and you'll be set. Just let them dry, leave them alone for now, or let them cure if you're using epoxy. And then I'm going to start blending all of my edges in on the trim. I start with a palm sander. I like the mouse. It works great. Lets me get into where places I need to get into. And I'm using like an 80 to 100 grit here to take a lot off really quick because I'm trying to blend. So I want to get everything blended in nicely, and as you can see, it's starting to blend really nice here. If you have any gaps or anything like that, you can fill it with some more 610, then wipe it and clean it a little bit real quick, let it cure, and then go back and then clean up all your edges with it. From the palm sander, I'll move to a hand sander to clean up everything else and then do my final blending until it's good enough for me, which I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I like it almost perfect. And then I'll just keep working that down with the different sizes of the sandpaper. Next, I'm going to take and cut my bungs off. I used my my multi-tool that I show in the earlier video, and just cut them off with that. You can also use a flush cut handsaw. Next, I'm going to blend them in. And I like a very flat surface to blend them in, so I'm not taking out more teak than I need on the sides. And then I'll go back, and then with the 220 grit on my palm sander, go over all of them again and blend them in completely. Next, I'll go back to hand sanding, and this I'm using 220 grit as well. And then this is my final sanding, and then I get it all smooth. Next, I'll start varnishing, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on varnishing here. You can click on this video that I've got right down here, and it will take you to, it'll open up a new window for you, and you can watch it after this, and it goes into detail on the proper technique for varnishing. This is the beginnings of the shot. Make sure everything's taped off and ready, and then that was actually the last coat, I believe. Last thing you want to do is take a straight razor and get all the little tape and little things that are left. You might have a little bit of varnish that came over and you need to get that out, and just very lightly cut it out and get it out of there. Clean everything up, and you should have some beautiful rails just like this, or trim, whatever you'd like to call it. Underneath the sink here, I'm about to go, and you will see the shelf that I showed you the start on. We just finished that up and stuck that in there as well. And then redid a new floor underneath there because the new hose didn't fit the old floor. Don't forget to subscribe, please. Thank you very much for watching my videos, and feel free to choose a video on the side here. And good luck with your project.